dearly love to have presented there.
Yes, well, benefit of hindsight, isn't it? It's interesting, though, because the Natural History Museum is essentially designed on the model of a classic Gothic church, isn't it?
Yes.
So it's almost a temple to science, and to some extent represents what Dawkins and co. have said, which is science has replaced God as an explanation. And indeed, their contention is that if religion, and Christianity specifically, has done anything, it's slowed the progress of science and our understanding of the world and the universe. What's your response to that obvious sort of objection to Christianity?
Well, I like quoting the venerable Richard Swinburne, who's one of our top philosophers. He says, science explains. I postulate God to explain why science explains. I think the point is, use the term science as explanation. And one of the things I do in my book is to really tease out, what do we mean by explanation? And what I fear, and I know, in fact, from reading them, that many of the so-called new atheists, who are now geriatric atheists, think is that God explanation and the scientific explanation are essentially the same, and therefore they compete. And I often say that is making a category mistake, because the science explanation is really dealing with the how, or the why of function, if you like. Why is that bit here, not there? Whereas the God explanation deals with the ultimate meaning and purpose. And I often say, look, God no more competes with science as an explanation of the universe than Henry Ford competes with the law of internal combustion as an explanation of the motor car. They are complementary explanations. And what fascinates me is sometimes when I'm in schools, I put this to kids. Here are two explanations of the motor car, Henry Ford and the laws of physics and internal combustion. And I say, choose, which is the true explanation? But sir, you need both. Why Dawkins cannot see that. But if you insist in saying that God is the same kind of explanation, then of course there's an inevitable but totally unnecessary clash. And even worse, I discovered, and I've written quite a lot about this, that if you think that God is a kind of gap, God of the gaps, I can't explain it, therefore God did it. So that God takes over where science leaves off, and as science advances, God gets completely squeezed out. Now, of course, if you define God to be a God of the gaps in this way, of course he's in conflict with science by definition. But God is not a God of the gaps, he's God of the whole show, of the bits we can explain and of the bits we can't explain. So when Newton, for example, discovered his law of gravitation and wrote to Bentley that he thought his work might be a pointer towards a divine intelligence, he didn't say, certainly didn't, of course, say, I've got a law of gravitation, I don't need God. No, he said, what a brilliant God who did it that way. And it's that ability to see that God is the God of the whole show. I often say to audiences, have you ever noticed the first sentence in the Bible? In the beginning, God created the bits of the universe we don't yet understand. Which, of course, is nonsense. But that is the kind of God that Dawkins was projecting. And that God is a delusion.
Let's talk about the doctrine of creation, because there's an interesting point in the